Heidelberg, October 28, 1945. Dear Hannah Arendt, often over the past years we worried about your fate, and for a long time now we did not have much hope that you were still alive. It seems to me that you have completely maintained your inner core, whether you have been in Königsberg, Heidelberg, Paris, or America. Anyone who is a real human being has to be able to do that. Here, we now have to see what we can rebuild out of the chaos. Yours, Karl Jaspers.
New York, 1945. Dear, dear Karl Jaspers, my teacher. I've been turning your manuscript guilt question over and over again in my mind. Your definition of Nazi policy as a crime strikes me as questionable. The Nazi crimes, it seems to me, explode the limits of the law, and that is precisely what constitutes their monstrousness. We're simply not equipped to deal on a human and political level with a guilt that is beyond crime and an innocence that is beyond goodness or virtue.
Dear Hannah Arendt, I'm not altogether comfortable with your view, because a guilt that goes beyond all criminal guilt inevitably takes on a streak of greatness, of satanic greatness. This, for me, is as inappropriate for the Nazis as all the talks about the demonic element in Hitler. It seems to me that we have to see these things in their total banality, in their prosaic triviality, because that's what truly characterizes them. Bacteria can cause epidemics that wipe out nations, but it remains merely bacteria.
My beloved, adored teacher. I realize completely that in the way I have expressed this up to now, I come dangerously close to that satanic greatness that I, like you, totally reject. Perhaps what is behind it all is not only that individual human beings kill other individual human beings, but that an organized attempt was made to eradicate the concept of the human being.
I think that the most profound experience in Arendt's life was reading the horrors of what happened in the Holocaust. And I think that it is that reflection of the horrors of the Holocaust that is a key to a deeper understanding of everything she wrote after that, you know, including on revolution, the human condition, between past and future, the life of the mind.
When people talk, her love of the world and so forth, it's a very real thing. But for the difference in the world, the difference is the plurality. That's another very basic concept of Arendt, is the plurality, the difference, the diversity. She thought, actually, that every single individual was unique. Every person in the world was unique. But more, I don't know if she was right. I think she was unique. I'm not so sure about everybody.
March 1961. My beloved, adored teacher. The Eichmann trial, against which you voiced your reservations at the outset, has now happily or unhappily thrown our plans out the window. But my dear and honored friend, I would never forgive myself if I didn't go and see with my own eyes this real-life disaster unfolding with all its uncanny vacuousness. Don't forget how early I left Germany and how little of this I really experienced directly. Many years ago, I described the totalitarian system. It was always the system rather than the individuals that I was referring to. And if you look at the system as a whole, every individual person indeed becomes a cog, small or big, in the machine of terror. Now I wanted to know who Eichmann is, insofar as he was a free agent, who had the freedom of choice. And for this reason, the whole small cog theory is irrelevant. This probably was my most powerful motive to go to Jerusalem.
In diesem Herbst, Frau Arendt, ist in der Bundesrepublik Ihr Buch über den Eichmann-Prozess in Jerusalem erschienen. Und diese Arbeit ist seit ihrem Erscheinen in Amerika sehr, sehr heftig diskutiert worden. Und besonders von jüdischer Seite richten sich ein Teil der Vorwürfe, die man ihnen gemacht hat, auf am Ton, in dem manches geschrieben ist.
Wenn man der Meinung ist, dass man über diese Dinge nur schreiben kann, wie soll ich sagen, pathetisch. Und indem man, wenn, oder sagen wir mal anders, ich will gar nicht aggressiv werden.
Werden Sie aggressiv?
Nein, wozu? Sehen Sie, es gibt die Leute nehmen mir eine Sache übel. Und das kann ich gewissermaßen verstehen von außen. Nämlich, dass ich da noch lachen kann. Nicht? Und ich war wirklich der Meinung, dass der Eichmann ein Hanswurst ist. Und ich sage Ihnen, ich habe dieses Polizeiverhör 3600 Seiten gelesen und sehr genau gelesen. Und ich weiß nicht, wie oft ich gelacht habe, aber laut. Eichmann war ganz intelligent, aber diese Dummheit hatte er. Das war die Dummheit, die so empörend war. Und das habe ich eigentlich gemeint mit der Banalität. Da ist keine Tiefe, das ist nicht dämonisch. Das ist einfach der Unwille, sich je vorzustellen, was eigentlich mit dem anderen ist. Nicht wahr? Ich habe keineswegs gemeint, der Eichmann sitzt in uns, jeder von uns hat den Eichmann und weiß der Deibel was. Nichts dergleichen.
Trotz allem weiß ich natürlich, dass ich meine Hände nicht in Unschuld waschen kann. Weil die Tatsache, dass ich ein absoluter Befehlsempfänger war, heute sicherlich nichts mehr bedeutet. Obgleich an meinen Händen kein Blut klebt, werde ich sicherlich der Beihilfe zum Mord schuldig gesprochen werden. Aber wie dem auch sei,
Evil is a surface phenomenon. We resist evil by not being swept away without thinking by the surface appearance of conventional things. We do it by reaching another dimension, which lies beyond the horizon of everyday life. In other words, the more superficial someone is, the more likely he will be to yield to evil. That is the banality of evil. An indication of such superficiality was the use of clichés. And Eichmann, God knows, was a perfect example.
aber wie dem auch sei, ich bin innerlich bereit, auch persönlich für das furchtbare Geschehen zu sühnen. Und ich weiß, dass mir die Todesstrafe bevorsteht. Ich bitte auch gar nicht um Gnade, denn es steht mir nicht zu. Ja, wenn es einen größeren Akt der Sühneleistung bedeutet, bin ich bereit, als abschreckendes Beispiel für alle, die letzten Vorkommnisse bekundeten Antisemiten der Länder dieser Erde, mich selbst öffentlich zu erhängen.
quiet sorrow which settles down after a catastrophe has never come to pass. The explosion of the First World War touched off a chain reaction in which we have been caught ever since, and which nobody seems to be able to stop. Its civil wars were not only bloodier and crueler than all their predecessors, they were followed by migrations of groups who were welcomed nowhere and could be assimilated nowhere. Once they had left their homeland, they remained homeless. Once they had left their state, they became stateless. And once they had been deprived of their human rights, they were rightless. They became the scum of the earth, superfluous. So the insane mass manufacture of corpses in Nazi time was preceded by the historical preparation of living corpses of refugees.
היא בת הדור הזה של בין שתי מלחמות העולם מאבד את הזכויות שלו. לפליטות הזאת, שמצד אחד הייתה חוויה קיומית קשה ביותר, היה גם ערך עצום בשבילה, והיא שמרה את המצב הקיומי הזה, המצב התודעתי והמצב הנפשי של פליטה, היא שמרה כל ימי חייה. היא האמינה שהיא מנקודת המבט הזאת, שמחוץ לבית, שמחוץ להמון, שמחוץ לקולקטיב, מאפשרת באמת נקודת תצפית מאוד מחודדת ומאוד ייחודית, ואולי גם נכונה יותר, אם אפשר לומר ככה, לעולם.
For me, at least, that's the most important thing she has to say about it, that these people have no rights. And in that sense, they are superfluous. They are superfluous to the political world. They are rightless people. They have no right whatsoever. She said, a criminal who commits a crime, who is a citizen of a state, he may be imprisoned, but he has rights. This refugee, this stateless person, has no rights at all. None.
Before they seize power and establish their world according to their doctrine, totalitarian movements conjure up a false, ideological, and consistent world, which is more in tune with the needs of the human mind than reality itself. What the masses refuse to recognize is the random nature of reality. They are predisposed to all ideologies because they explain facts as mere laws and eliminate coincidences and spontaneity by inventing an all-embracing omnipotence, which is supposed to be at the root of every accident. Totalitarian propaganda and ideology thrives on this escape from reality into fiction, from coincidence into consistency. Logic is its core.
The ideology creates the evil itself, like Stalinism or Hitlerism, or you have the Pol Pot in Cambodia. In each cases, you have this ideology which somehow it brings people to this superfluousness, which wants to monopolize truth, which somehow wants to destroy the mode of thinking and the process of thinking and judging, and somehow also wants to put an end to the human capacity of speech and action.
It was in 1924, the University of Marburg. There I met, among the new students, this very striking young girl, Hannah Arendt. At that time, there was the great attraction for philosophers, for philosophy students, was the presence of a man by the name of Martin Heidegger, who wasn't famous yet at the time, but by word of mouth, it was known that he was a rising star or a coming power in contemporary philosophy. Anyway, he must have recognized very soon that she was something special. And very quickly they developed a personal relationship, which in a strange way lasted through Hannah Arendt's life.
February 1925. Dear Miss Arendt, everything should be simple and clear and pure between us. Only then will we be worthy of having been allowed to meet. You are my pupil and I your teacher, but that is only the circumstances of what's happened to us. I will never be able to call you mine, but from now on you will belong in my life. You have lost your disquiet, which means you have found your way to the innermost, purest feminine essence. Someday you will be grateful, not to me, that this visit to my office hour was your decisive retreat from the path of academic research, which only men can endure. We must not think of ourselves as soulmates, something no one ever experiences. I cannot and do not want to separate your loyal eyes and beautiful figure from your pure trust, the honor and goodness of your girlish essence. Yours, Martin. My dear Hannah, today I greeted you during my lecture and was happy that you were there. The lecture is still a strain for me, but I hope I'll pull through and not be as overwhelmed by the flu as my wife was. My wife will need a rather long time to recover, and for the time being, I can't imagine how the household will be maintained. I'm writing this to you, even though I know you do not expect an excuse for my silence. Much love. Yours, Martin.
Canningsburg, 1925. Perhaps my youth will struggle free of the spell. Perhaps my soul will realize what it is to speak out under a different sky, and thus overcome sickness and confusion and learn simplicity and the freedom of organic growth. But it's more likely that I'll continue to pursue my life in idle experiments and with curiosity, until finally the long and eagerly awaited end takes me, putting an arbitrary stop to my useless activity.
Gibt es in Ihrer Erinnerung ein exaktes Vorkommnis, von dem an Sie Ihre Hinwendung zum Politischen datieren könnten?
Ja, wissen Sie, in gewissem Sinne kann ich sagen, am 27. Februar 1933 Reichstagsbrand und die darauf in derselben Nacht erfolgende illegalen Verhaftungen, die sogenannten Schutzhaft. Danach, Sie wissen, die Leute kamen in Gestapo-Keller oder in Konzentrationslager. Dies war für mich ein unmittelbarer Schock. Ich war nicht mehr der Meinung, dass man jetzt einfach zusehen kann.
In the summer of 1924, Franz Kafka died. Today, we know that Kafka's detention was not a mere nightmare. In his search for the real reasons for his ordeal, Kay turns to the prison chaplain for advice, and he preaches the hidden greatness of the system and orders him not to ask for the truth. For it is not necessary to accept everything as true. One must accept it as necessary, a no-choice situation. A melancholy conclusion, said Kay. It turns lying into a universal principle. True enough, the force of the machinery lies precisely in this appearance of necessity on the one hand, and in the admiration of the people for necessity on the other. Lying for the sake of necessity appears as something that is most sublime.
Concentration camps was one of the things you found immediately necessary upon coming to power, was it not? And you set them up as a matter of necessity, as you saw it.
Dinge wurden notwendig aufgrund der vorhandenen Gegnerschaft.
Yeah. And I assume that that is the only kind of government that you think can function in Germany under present conditions.
Unter den damaligen Umständen war sie nach meiner Auffassung die einzig mögliche Form und sie hat auch gezeigt, dass Deutschland aus seinem tiefen Elend der Verarmung und Arbeitslosigkeit in kurzer Zeit zu einer verhältnismäßigen Blüte wieder gekommen war. Selbstverständlich wurde auch da und dort geschlagen und es sind Rohheitsakte verübt worden. Aber gemessen an all dem Gewesenen und an der Größe des Vorgangs ist doch diese deutsche Freiheitsrevolution die unblutigste und disziplinierteste aller bisherigen Revolutionen der Geschichte gewesen.
Mein Führer, meine Kameraden, nach Ihrem Befehl, mein Führer, nach Ihnen formt sich die junge Generation unseres Volkes, weil Sie die höchste Selbstlosigkeit dieser Nation voranleben, will auch diese Jugend selbstlos sein. Adolf Hitler, der Führer der deutschen Jugend, hat das Wort.
The trouble with totalitarian regimes is not that they play power politics in an especially ruthless way, but that behind their politics is hidden an entirely new and deceptive concept of reality. Idealism. That is, unwavering faith in an ideological, fictitious world, rather than just a lust for power.
Meine deutsche Jugend, wir wollen einst keine Klassen und Stände mehr sehen. Und ihr dürft sie in euch schon nicht mehr groß werden lassen. Wir wollen, dass dieses Volk einst friedliebend und aber auch tapfer ist. Und ihr müsst friedfertig sein.
Dear students, the concept of freedom for German students is now being restored to its true meaning, out of which the future loyalty and service of German youth would evolve. Camaraderie marks the individual with an imprint that carries him beyond himself. We know the resoluteness of their expressions, the stern clarity of their gaze, their decisive handshake, their uncompromising way of speaking. This new race is at every moment emerging. Now this student will become a worker.
Und ich weiß, das kann nicht anders sein. Denn ihr seid Fleisch, von unserem Fleisch und Blut, von unserem Blut. Und in euren jungen Gehirn brennt dasselbe Geist, der uns beherrscht.
German students, may you ceaselessly grow in the courage to sacrifice yourselves for the salvation of our nation's essential being, and the increase of its innermost strength of its polity. The Führer, himself and he alone, is German reality, present and future, and its law. Heil Hitler!
Es war, als ob sich ein leerer Raum um einen bildete. Nun, ich lebte in einem intellektuellen Milieu. Und ich kannte aber auch andere Menschen. Und ich konnte feststellen, dass unter Intellektuellen das sozusagen die Regel war. Und unter den anderen nicht. Und die Geschichte habe ich nie vergessen. Und mit einer Sache ging ich raus aus Deutschland. Wie ich damals dachte, natürlich immer etwas übertreibend. Nie wieder. Ich rühre nie wieder irgendeine intellektuelle Geschichte an. Ich will mit dieser Gesellschaft nichts zu tun haben. Ich war ja natürlich nicht der Meinung, dass also nun deutsche Juden oder deutsch-jüdische Intellektuelle, wenn sie in einer anderen Situation gewesen wären, als in der sie waren, sich wesentlich anders verhalten hätten. Das Schlimme war doch, dass sie dann wirklich daran glaubten. Für kurze Zeit, manche für sehr kurze Zeit. Das heißt, zu Hitler fiel ihnen was ein. Und zum Teil ungeheuer interessante Dinge, nicht? Ganz fantastisch interessante und komplizierte und hoch über dem gewöhnlichen Niveau schwebende Dinge. Das habe ich als grotesk empfunden.
L'ennemi est celui-là et tout un chacun qui fait planer une menace essentielle contre l'existence du peuple et de ses membres. L'ennemi peut s'être hanté, greffé sur la racine la plus intérieure de l'existence du peuple et s'opposer à l'essence propre de celui-ci, agir contre lui.
The underlying requirement is then to find the enemy, to bring him to light or even to create him, in order that there may be a standing up to the enemy, and that our existence would not become apathetic. It is often much harder to seek out the enemy as such and to lead him to reveal himself, to avoid nurturing illusions about him, to remain ready to attack and to cultivate constant preparedness to attack on a long-term basis, with the goal of total extermination.
On peut dire qu'il manifeste dans son cours, dès 1933, une intention génocidaire à l'égard du peuple juif, parce que cet ennemi antérieur greffé sur le peuple allemand, c'est d'abord et avant tout le juif assimilé, Donc ma thèse, c'est que le fond de la doctrine heideggerienne est nazi et qu'il n'est philosophe qu'en apparence. Il utilise une partie du langage philosophique pour légitimer un contenu qui n'est pas philosophique, car une doctrine raciale d'extermination, à mon avis, ne peut pas être une philosophie.
She didn't think Heidegger was an evil man, and it is not, Heidegger never killed anybody or anything like that. He never, he was absolutely bamboozled. He was made a fool of. He made a fool of himself. But this was a real thinker. But when she said, when the chips are down, that's when thinking becomes a phenomenon. It enters the phenomenal world as judgment. No, I will not do that. Heidegger didn't do it. He didn't say, no, I will not become rector.
But this is exactly the banality of evil, suspending thought.
Well, that yeah, it is in a way a counterpart, I suppose, yes.
לנאשם לקום. מה בכלל הייתה דעתך על כך, על ההשקפה הנאצית שצריך להרחיק את היהודים מגרמניה?
In den Jahren 34, 35 hatte ich überhaupt mir noch keine Gedanken diesbezüglich gemacht.
Und was Sie Idealismus nennen, Sie nennen sich ein Idealist auch für jene Zeit.
Jawohl. Ich verstand darunter, den gepredigten Nationalismus anzuhängen und als Nationalist gemäß meinem Eid meine Pflicht zu tun. Ja. Das verstand ich darunter. Ja. Und es ist mir heute klar, dass jeder Nationalismus in seiner überspitzten Form zum krassen Egoismus führt und von dort aus ist es zum Radikalismus nicht mehr sehr weit.
He was certainly an idealist. An idealist, according to Eichmann, isn't only someone who believes in his idea, but he also lives for this idea. And he's ready to sacrifice everything for it, and especially everyone. The longer one listened to him, the more obvious it became that his inability to speak was closely connected with an inability to think, namely to think from the standpoint of somebody else. And the German society of 80 million people had been shielded against reality and factuality by exactly the same means. The same self-deception, lies, and dumbness that had now become ingrained in Eichmann's mentality.
Oh, no, I'm sure he was anti-Semitic, and I'm sure that he loved his Führer and that he swore allegiance to the Nazi ideology. I mean, there's no question about that. So it is this non-thinking adoption of fascist, racist ideologies, which she is saying belongs to a kind of new way of life, a new modality. It has become, under those conditions, it became normal. It is hideous
that it's normal. It's hideous that it is banal. Right? If we say that this evil became banal, ordinary, taken for granted, normal, we are describing a very hideous reality. So she is not saying it is banal. She's saying it's a new form of hideousness that is able to pass itself off as the normal, which is why we have to be all the more alert.
Man is a social animal, and life is not easy for him when social ties are cut off. Lacking the courage to fight for change to our social and legal status, we've decided instead, so many of us, to try to change our identity. We don't want to be refugees since we don't want to be Jews. We don't call ourselves stateless because the majority of stateless people are Jews. If patriotism were a matter of practice, we should be the most patriotic people in the world. The human being who's lost his place in a community, his political status in the struggle of the times, and his legal persona, loses the meaning of speech and all human connections. He's left with those qualities which usually become relevant only in the sphere of his private life. This mere naked existence that is all that is mysteriously given to us by birth, and which includes the shape of our bodies and the talents of our minds, can be affirmed only by the unpredictable friendship and sympathy, or by the great and incalculable grace of love, which says, I want you to be, without being able to give any particular reason for such supreme affirmation.
החסד של האהבה, היא שוב מדברת מתוך החוויה האישית שלה. כאשר היא פליטה בפריז, בתוך קבוצה שלמה של פליטים כאלה נזרקו למעשה מתוך ההיסטוריה, ומתוך האנושות היא שם פוגשת את אהבת חייה. והאהבה הזאת באמת גואלת אותה במובן מסוים, ונותנת לה תחושה של בית בעולם.
May 1936, Paris. Dearest, I went back from Clamart and want to continue our conversation while your voice is still fresh in my ear. I will send this letter to your train so that it can accompany you to the Zionist Congress in my place.
My dear Heinrich, it became clear during my journey how important all this is to me. I literally felt as if someone had stripped the skin from my body. My remark about being a young girl for you made me blush. Look, you said yourself everything speaks against us. What is this everything, apart from the prejudices that I am a Jew and you are not? I think that I love you, I mean it. I kiss your mouth and nose. H. The Jewish Congress is to begin in half an hour. The participants can be grouped into Messiah trumpeters and rationalists. I belong to the latter group, but with a good dose of loudmouth thrown in. Because, my dear, For me, Palestine is the center of our national aspirations, not because 2,000 years ago some people lived there from whom we are supposed to be descended, but because for 2,000 years the craziest of people took pleasure in preserving our past in the present. Because for them, the ruins of Jerusalem are rooted in the heart of time. Think of me, and don't forget how to kiss. Hannah.
The Jewish pariah, which was her main obsession in the 30s and 40s, the notion that the Jew was displaced by not having a political home, made her very energetic in the Zionist movement. And she had a very close friendship with Kurt Blumenfeld. She was a real Zionist.
היא גיבורה ציונית בשנות ה-30. בשנות ה-40, כאשר היא רואה את הכיוונים שאליהם הולכת התנועה הציונית. החתירה העיקשת והמתמדת אל עבר ריבונות לאומית. ולה הייתה בעיה גדולה עם המופע הפוליטי הזה שנקרא מדינת אומה, מדינת לאום. היא הכירה את המדרון הזה שהוליך ממדינת אומה, שהלאומיות השתלטה עליה, חדלה להיות מדינת כל האזרחים, ונהפכת מדינת הרוב הלאומי שלה.
Coming from the darkness of Germany, she came to this country and she saw plurality, and she saw diversity, and she saw things that she had never seen before, the mix, the nationalities. She loved that. Yes, there was a kind of idealization, but she did see these political principles here. The fact that we are plural, that is definitely a condition of human freedom. The fact that we can think, the fact that we can act. Insofar as we are human, we are capable of spontaneous thought and action. I would right now agree with that.
Das Entscheidende ist der Tag gewesen, an dem wir von Auschwitz erfuhren. Und das war 1943 und erst haben wir es nicht geglaubt. Dann haben wir es ein halbes Jahr später doch geglaubt. Weil es uns bewiesen wurde. Und das ist der eigentliche Schock gewesen. Dieses hätte nicht geschehen dürfen.
A world in which men are taught they are superfluous, in which punishment is meted out without connection to crime, and where work is performed without product, is a place where senselessness is produced anew daily. Yet within the framework of totalitarian ideology, nothing can be more logical. If the inmate is vermin, it is logical that it will be killed by poison gas. If they are degenerate, they should not be allowed to contaminate the population. If they have slave-like souls, no one should waste his time trying to re-educate them. It is precisely for the sake of its messianic sense of redemption that it's necessary for totalitarianism to destroy every trace of what we call human dignity. For respect for human dignity implies the recognition of the uniqueness of my fellow men, or our fellow nations, as builders of many worlds, and as co-builders of one common world shared by all.
Müller sagte mir, in Minsk werden die Juden verschossen. Ich möchte nicht haben, wie das, was ich will. Daraufhin bin ich nach Minsk gefahren. Als ich hinkam, sah ich aber gerade noch, wie junge Schützen hier in eine Grube schossen, nur gesehen habe, ohne Gedanken, ohne mir irgendwelche Gedanken zu machen. Ich habe nur gesehen, weiter nichts. Schossen hinein und ich sehe noch eine Frau, Arme nach rückwärts und dann sind auch mir die Knie abgewandelt und ich bin weg. Das war für mich auch ungeheuerlich. Ich bin keine so robuste Natur, die, sagen wir mal, ohne irgendwelche Reagenz irgendetwas über sich, in dieser Art über sich ergehen lassen kann. Wenn ich heute eine krachende Schnittwunde bei einem Menschen sehe, dann kann ich nicht zusehen. Ich gehöre zu dieser Kategorie von Menschen. Sodass man mir auch sagt, ich hätte kein Arzt werden dürfen. Ich komme hin, besuche dort die Staatspolizeistelle und sage ich, wie kann man denn einfach da hier hineinknallen auf eine Frau und Kinder? Wie ist denn das möglich, sage ich. Das ist keine. Die Leute müssen ja entweder wahnsinnig werden oder sie werden Sadisten, unsere eigenen Leute.
Ist es vielleicht so, dass die partiellen Zuständigkeiten, die jedem nur gegeben sind, die Möglichkeit moralischer Einsichten verdecken? Eichmann hat gesagt, ich saß am Schreibtisch und machte meine Sachen. Und der ehemalige Gauleiter von Danzig hat erklärt, seine offizielle Seele habe sich immer mit dem identifiziert, was er getan habe. Seine private Seele sei stets dagegen gewesen.
Ja, also dieses ist die sogenannte innere Immigration unter den Mördern. Lässt jede rastlose Tätigkeit Verantwortung verflüchtigen. Es gibt im Englischen einen idiomatischen Ausdruck, stop and think. Halt an und denk nach. Kein Mensch kann nachdenken, ohne anzuhalten. Wenn Sie jemanden in eine rastlose Tätigkeit hereinzwingen, nicht wahr, oder sich hereinzwingen lässt, dann werden Sie immer dieselbe Geschichte haben. Sie werden immer die Sache haben, dass Verantwortungsbewusstsein sich nicht bilden kann. Es kann sich nur bilden in dem Moment, wo man reflektiert, nicht über sich selbst, sondern über das, was man tut.
Haben Sie schon mal im Dunkeln geküsst, ja? Wissen Sie denn auch, wie schön sowas ist? Nein, wenn man wirklich einmal alles vergisst, so, das ist ein Blick ins Himmelreich. Waren Sie schon einmal richtig verliebt, ja? Wie es sowas sonst im Kino nur gibt, nein? Oder sind Sie etwa ganz ungeübt? Wie ich darauf verrate ich Ihnen.
It is not so much the barbed wire as the skillfully manufactured unreality of those whom it fences in that provokes such enormous cruelties, and ultimately makes extermination look like a perfectly normal measure. Everything that was done in the camps is known to us from the world of perverse, malignant fantasies. The difficult thing to understand is that these gruesome crimes took place in a phantom world, which, however, has materialized, as it were, into a world which is complete with all the sensual data of reality. Suddenly it becomes evident that the power of man is greater than one ever dared to think, and that man can realize hellish fantasies without making the sky fall or the earth open.
The Christian world owes to the Jew reparation for all the centuries of wrong and hurt and humiliation, reparation for the awful and tragic Hitler years. That reparation will be a free and democratic Jewish commonwealth in Eretz Israel, even though it means little or nothing for other people.
American Zionists, from left to right, adopted unanimously the demand for a free and democratic Jewish commonwealth, which shall embrace the whole of Palestine. This is a turning point in Zionist history, for it means that the revisionist program, so long bitterly repudiated, has finally proved victorious. This time, the Arabs were simply not mentioned in the solution, which obviously leaves them the choice between voluntary immigration and second-class citizenship. A home that my neighbor does not recognize is not a home. A Jewish national home that is not recognized and not respected by its neighboring people is not a home, but an illusion, until it becomes a battlefield. This is proof of the illusionist, utopian, and apolitical element that has so often been a part of Jewish politics in Palestine, and which first expresses itself in an overestimation of what was practical and opportunistic. Another traditionally Zionist feeling that has by now seized all sections of Jewish people is the cynical and deep-rooted conviction that all Gentiles are anti-Semitic, and everybody and everything is against the Jews. The notion that we can use our enemies for our own salvation has always been, for me, the original sin of Zionism. Thus, the socialist, revolutionary Jewish national movement, which started half a century ago, with ideas so lofty that it overlooked the particular realities of the Middle East and the general wickedness of the world, has ended, as do most such movements, with unequivocal support not only of national but of chauvinist claims, not against enemies of the Jewish people, but against its possible friends and present neighbors. Obviously, this attitude is plain racist chauvinism, and it is equally obvious that this division between Jews and all other people who are to be classed as enemies does not differ from other master race theories.
I think just as she thought the Germans ought to have lived with the Jews and the other minorities, she thought the Jews had to live with the Palestinians and that the whites had to live with the blacks. and that plurality, this idea of plurality, was essential to our way of living together politically. There was no doing away with plurality, right? If you try to do away with plurality, you become genocidal. Okay? That just seems absolutely crucial to me.
At the same time, the human need for justice can find no satisfactory reply in considering all German people as equally guilty. Where all are considered guilty, nobody can be judged. For that guilt is not accompanied by even the mere pretense of responsibility. Guilt implies the consciousness of guilt, and punishment requires evidence that the criminal is a responsible person. It has been well described by an American correspondent in a dialogue he conducted in the Majdanek concentration camp. Question: did you kill people in the camp? Answer: yes. Question: did you bury them alive? Answer: yes. Question: did you personally help kill people? Answer: absolutely not. I was only a paymaster in the camp. Question: what did you think of what was going on? Answer: it was bad at first, but we got used to it. Question: do you know the Russians will hang you? Answer, bursting into tears: why should they? What have I done? Really, he had done nothing. He had only carried out orders. And since when has it been a crime to carry out orders? Since when has it been a virtue to rebel? Since when could one only be decent by welcoming death? What then had he done? My beloved teacher. Regarding Heidegger's behavior in 1933, it is a fact that he prohibited his teacher and friend, Professor Edwin Husserl, to enter the philosophy faculty because he was a Jew. I know that this letter was an official form, and I know that many people have excused it for that reason. Always seemed to me that the moment Heidegger was obliged to put his name to this document, he should have resigned. However foolish he may have been, he was capable of understanding that. Now, you might say that this happened in the rush of business, and I would probably reply that the truly irreparable things happen often and deceptively, almost like accidents, and when one steps easily across the red line, feeling certain that it is of no consequence anymore. That wall, which rises up, is what truly divides people. In other words, because I know that this signature almost killed Husserl, I can't help but regard Heidegger as a potential murderer. You'll be familiar with the various interviews he gave. Nothing but insane lies with what I think is clearly a pathological streak. And then, of course, this whole intricate and childish dishonesty must have crept into his philosophizing. Yours, as always, Hannah. Hilda, my dear friend, I left Freiburg yesterday, where I went to retrieve abandoned Jewish property. If not for that purpose, would I have gone to meet Heidegger? I don't know. In any event, H looks the same, and then he went on about some tragedy in which I presumably played a role in the first 2 acts. His tone depicted guilt, but in all honesty, he has the eyes of a wretched poodle. Don't show this letter to yours. I'm basically happy for being right, never to forget.
She helped create the Heidegger myth. The Heidegger myth is that he engaged in politics in 1933, realized that this is not for him, and then withdrew. That, to me, is a myth, and it's not true. We know his active support of the Nazis for long after that, okay? Where I'm critical of Hannah is that after the reunion, after she meets him, after that there really isn't a kind of outspoken critique of the role that he played, you know. So in this respect, I think there was a kind of blindness and deficiency.
משפט האחרון שהגרוסה הנה אמרה לי, זה היה ביולי 75, כשהבאנו אותה במרבח לרכבת, אז על הרציף אני ידעתי שהיא נסעה אליו, אז פשוט שאלתי אותה, muss das sein? והתשובה הידועה הייתה, Fröschlein, es gibt Dinge, die sind stärker als der Mensch. יש דברים שהם יותר חזקים מהאדם, זהו.
I think that part of the reason that he has enjoyed such, never mind the criticism, but such renown, is precise because she was an independent thinker, that she doesn't fit any traditional categories. She's not a classical liberal, she's not a classicist Marxist, she's not a classic conservative, you know, she's always transforming. And here's a person thinking about the most important of the issues without using these standard categories, you know.
I think there's an exilic perspective that is Jewish and not Jewish. It's Jewish for sure because she's a Jewish exile, but it gives her a certain kind of commitment. It's the basis of a commitment for all refugees. In other words, she universalizes from the position of Jewish exile. And the universalization of that perspective leads to, I think, an extremely important prioritization of the right of the refugee.
Difficult as it is to conceive evil, even in the face of its factual existence, it seems to be closely connected with the invention of a system in which all men are equally superfluous. The dangers of the corpse factories and holes of oblivion is that today, masses of people are continually rendered superfluous when we continue to think of our world in utilitarian terms, rather than in terms of the common world, shared by all. Political, social, and economic events in modern times are in a silent conspiracy with totalitarian instruments devised to make man superfluous. Totalitarian solutions may well survive the fall of totalitarian regimes in the form of a strong temptation, which will come up whenever it seems impossible to alleviate political, social, or economic misery in a manner worthy of man.